Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Your husband doesn't love you? He's been with me for a year. We're having a baby. The mistress shocked the woman, showing up right at her workplace. Coming to her senses, the wife decided to teach the sweet couple a lesson immediately. Hello, dear listeners. What city are you joining us from? Write in the comments and I'll start a new story. I wish you a pleasant hour with us. Monday morning began, as always, with the usual ritual. Espiransa stood before the mirror in the spacious bathroom, applying the final touches of makeup. The reflection showed a woman who knew how to keep herself together, impeccably styled dark hair, a strict sea green suit that emphasized her slender figure, and eyes that showed a habit of controlling the situation. At 38 years old, Espiransa looked exactly as the deputy chief physician of a private clinic should: confident, respectable, reliable. Their apartment in the elite district breathed prosperity and impeccable taste. Italian furniture, paintings by contemporary artists, perfect order in everything, from arranged books to iron towels. Even the morning light penetrating through the panoramic windows seemed specially selected by a designer to create an atmosphere of successful life. The kitchen smelled of freshly brewed coffee and French croissants, which Cipriano always ordered from an expensive pastry shop. He was already sitting at the table, scrolling through news on his tablet, and looked as impeccable as always. A snow-white shirt, expensive watch on his wrist, light tan that he maintained in a tanning salon. "Good morning," said Cipriano without looking up from the screen. "Coffee is in the coffee maker, the way you like it." "Thank you," Esperanza sat down across from him, pouring coffee into a thin porcelain cup. "Plans for today?" "3 surgeries, then a meeting with investors." Cipriano finally looked up. "I might be late. Do you mind?" Esperanza shook her head, noting to herself how often he had been staying late recently. But then it seemed natural. A successful surgeon always has a lot of work. She herself often stayed at the clinic until late evening. "By the way," Cipriano put down the tablet, "we could go to the country house this weekend. We haven't been there in a while." "Good idea," Esperanza agreed, though she noticed something unnatural in his voice, as if he had planned this conversation in advance. They finished their coffee in habitual silence, each thinking about their own affairs. Esperanza was thinking about the upcoming day. New equipment for the cosmetology department was supposed to be delivered today, and she needed to oversee the installation. Cipriano was checking messages on his phone, occasionally typing responses. Cipriano left first, leaving behind a barely perceptible aroma of expensive perfume and a rumpled bed. Esperanza noticed a barely distinguishable lipstick mark on his shirt collar, but then thought it was an accident. Yesterday, they were at a corporate event at the clinic, and many colleagues kissed when greeting. Their relationship had long acquired the regularity of Swiss watches: morning coffee in silence, evening conversations about work, weekends at the country house. Esperanza didn't complain. Stability seemed to her a sign of mature relationships, that very harmony that all reasonable people strive for after a stormy youth. Remembering their meeting 15 years ago, when she was a young nurse and he was an ambitious resident, Esperanza often thought about how far they had both come. Then their romance was passionate and unpredictable, full of plans for the future and dreams of children. Now it seemed to them that they had reached that point of balance, where everyone knows their place and their duties. The clinic greeted her with the familiar hum of air conditioners and the smell of disinfection, which had long gone unnoticed, becoming part of the air she breathed. Glass corridors reflected the morning light, creating the illusion of a crystal palace where everyone knew their place and performed their role in a perfectly tuned mechanism. Classical music played softly in the hall, and administrators in snow-white coats greeted the first patients of the day. "Good morning, Dr. Esperanza," greeted the administrator Marisol, handing her a folder with documents. "Meeting at 9, after that appointments until 2, and at 3 you have a meeting with equipment suppliers. By the way, they called from the cosmetology department. They want to clarify details about the new laser." "All right, I'll call them back after the meeting," Esperanza nodded, running her eyes over the schedule. "What about the patient who complained about an allergic reaction?" "Everything is settled. Tests showed it was individual intolerance to the drug. we changed the treatment plan. Marisol efficiently reported on current affairs, demonstrating the smooth work that Espiransa was proud of. The day promised to be busy but predictable, exactly how she liked it. Control over the situation had always been her strong point, that character trait that helped her rise from an ordinary nurse to deputy chief physician of a prestigious clinic. The planning meeting went as usual. Discussion of new treatment protocols, questions about staff schedules, minor administrative problems that were solved quickly and efficiently. Dr. Aguilar, Espiransa addressed the head of the therapeutic department. How are things going with implementing the new patient booking system? The staff is adapting faster than expected, answered the elderly doctor. I think by the end of the week we'll completely transition to the new system. Excellent. And what about advanced training for junior staff? Courses start next month. We've already submitted applications for 20 people. Espiransa felt like a conductor of an orchestra where every musician knew their part by heart. She liked this role. It gave a sense of being needed and control over the situation. After the meeting, patient appointments began. Espiransa was always proud that, despite her administrative position, she didn't lose touch with medicine. Every Monday she saw patients, and this time was especially valuable to her, an opportunity to remember what all this was started for. The first was a young woman with complaints of constant fatigue. Espiransa listened to her attentively, ordered additional tests, explained possible causes of the malaise. In the patient's eyes there was gratitude, that special appreciation people feel when they feel they are really being listened to and understood. Delilah, she addressed the second patient, an elderly woman, studying the test results. Your indicators have improved, but I recommend continuing the course for another month. Your body is slowly but surely recovering. Doctor, can I start exercising already? The woman asked hopefully. You can, but very carefully. Start with 10 minutes a day. Avoid sudden movements. In 2 weeks, you can increase the load. The patient nodded gratefully, and in her eyes was that same appreciation for which it was worth enduring endless meetings and administrative routine. Espiransa felt needed, useful in her rightful place. Around 2 o'clock, when the appointments were coming to an end, Marisol looked into the office with a somewhat puzzled expression. Dr. Espiransa, there's a girl here to see you. She says it's a personal and very urgent matter. She won't give her name, but she looks, well, very determined. There was uncertainty in the administrator's voice. I suggested she make an appointment, but she insists she must see you specifically and right now. Espiransa raised her eyebrows. Personal visitors at the clinic were rare. All acquaintances preferred to call in advance. All right, invite her in, but first see out the last patient. A minute later, a girl entered the office who immediately attracted attention with her appearance. Young, no more than 25, with long blonde hair styled by a professional stylist, and a figure that looked flawless even under a modest but clearly expensive dress. She wore a thin gold chain with an elegant pendant around her neck. Her manicure was perfect, and her makeup looked as if it had just been done by a makeup artist. But most striking was her look, confident, almost defiant. The look of a person who came not to ask, but to declare. Are you Dr. Espiransa? The girl's voice was melodious, but there was a steely note in it, which happens in people accustomed to getting their way. Yes, I'm listening. Espiransa gestured for the guest to sit, mentally wondering who this could be. A patient? A patient's relative? A journalist? A representative of some pharmaceutical company? The girl sat down, elegantly crossing her legs in expensive shoes, and looked intently at Espiransa. A strange silence hung in the air, filled with undefined tension. In the office, only the quiet hum of the air conditioner and distant sounds from the corridor could be heard. My name is Aylin, the stranger finally said, and there was an intonation in her voice that made Espiransa tense. I came to talk to you about your husband. Esperanza's heart skipped a beat. A thought flashed through her mind about an accident, about a hospital, about something terrible that could have happened to Cipriano. Her hands involuntarily clenched into fists. Did something happen? She asked quickly, already mentally reaching for the phone. In a way, yes. Aylin smiled slightly, and this smile seemed predatory to Espiransa, like a cat playing with a mouse. What happened is that your husband has been seeing me for over a year, and we're expecting a child. The words hit like a cold wave. Esperanza felt everything inside freeze, as if time had stopped in this bright office with its familiar smells and sounds. Her mouth instantly went dry, and her temples began to throb. She looked at the girl and couldn't believe what she had heard. The world seemed to tilt, losing its usual stability. "Excuse me, what did you say?" Her voice sounded strange, as if it belonged to someone else. "Your husband, Cipriano, has been cheating on you with me for over a year." Aylin said this as simply as if reporting the weather forecast. "At first we just dated, and now we're having a baby. He doesn't know about the pregnancy yet, but I decided to talk to you first." "Why did you come to me?" Esperanza was surprised by the firmness of her own voice. Years of administrative work had taught her to keep face even in the most unexpected situations. "Because I consider it fair play to warn you." Aylin leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the effect she had produced. "Cipriano said your marriage is just a formality, that you live like neighbors. But I decided to see for myself and tell you the truth. He loves me and stays with you only out of habit and fear of change." Every word cut like a blade. Esperanza tried to find a lie in the girl's words, hoped this was someone's cruel joke or revenge. But intuition told her. Aylin was telling the truth. Too many details, too confident a tone, too accurate hitting of pain points. "How long has this been going on?" asked Esperanza, not understanding why she needed this information. "We met at that medical conference last year in spring." Aylin willingly shared details, as if telling a pleasant love story. "I worked there as a model for presenting cosmetic procedures. Cipriano came up to meet me during the coffee break, said I was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. At first we just drank coffee, talked about life, about plans, and then he rented an apartment in the center where we meet. He says he hasn't had intimacy with you for a long time, that you've turned into business partners, not spouses." Espiransa listened and felt something cold spreading in her chest. Memories of the last year flashed through her mind. Cipriano's frequent delays at work, sudden business trips, his absent-mindedness at home, new perfume that he explained as changing his image, strange calls that he took in another room. "Does he know you came to me?" Her voice sounded mechanical. "No, this is my initiative." Aylin straightened up, and pride for her own decisiveness could be read in her posture. "You see, I'm tired of this uncertainty. I'm 24 years old. I don't want to be a mistress all my life. And now when there is going to be a baby, Cipriano must make a choice. And I decided to help him in this by putting all the dots over the i's." There was such confidence in her own righteousness in the girl's voice that Esperanza felt a wave of nausea. Aylin clearly considered herself the winner in a competition that the second participant didn't even know existed. "Are you sure about the pregnancy?" asked Esperanza, clinging to the last hope. "Absolutely. 3rd week." Aylin put her hand on her belly with such tenderness as if the child had already been born. "Cipriano will be happy when he finds out. He often said he would like more children, but you're against it." This was another slap in the face. She and Cipriano indeed had no children. First their careers got in the way, then problems appeared that they kept postponing, and then they stopped discussing this topic altogether. The last time they talked about children was about 3 years ago, and then Cipriano said it was too early. They needed to stabilize the business first. "What do you want from me?" asked Esperanza in an even tone. "I want you to let him go." Aylin leaned forward, and an excited spark lit up in her eyes. "Give him a divorce without scandals and claims. Cipriano is too decent to just leave the family. He'll be tormented by guilt. But if you make the decision yourself—" "I understand." Esperanza stood up from the table. "Thank you for your frankness." Aylin clearly expected a different reaction. Surprise mixed with disappointment flickered across her face. She obviously expected tears, hysteria, pleas not to destroy the family. "And what will you do?" she asked curiously. "Think," Esperanza answered curtly. "Goodbye." After the girl left, Esperanza locked the office door and sank into her chair. The silence rang in her ears, and outside the window, ordinary life continued. Cars drove by, people walked, the sun shone. The world hadn't stopped because her own world had just collapsed. Her hands were shaking, there was bitterness in her mouth, and only one thought spun in her head. How could I not have noticed? Strangely, there were no tears. Instead, some cold calmness was growing in her chest, similar to what comes before a difficult operation. Esperanza had always been able to pull herself together in critical moments, and now this skill kicked in automatically. She took out her phone and opened the photos, their joint pictures with Cipriano over the last year. Now much was seen in a new light. His absent gaze at family celebrations, reluctance to go on vacation together, formal goodbye kisses. How could she not have noticed? And most importantly, why didn't she want to notice? Strange episodes came to mind. How he suddenly started going to the gym, saying the doctor advised him to move more. How he changed his hairstyle, explaining it as a desire to look younger for patients. How he started wearing new underwear, which he allegedly bought by chance on a business trip. How he started taking vitamins to increase endurance. Espiransa stood up and went to the window. Down in the park, jacarandas were blooming. Their purple flowers covered the ground like a lilac carpet. Life continued, and she had to continue too. But what it would be like depended only on her. The phone rang. Cipriano appeared on the screen. "Hi, dear." Her husband's voice sounded as always warm and familiar. "How are things? Not too tired?" "Everything's fine," answered Espiranza, surprised at how natural her voice sounded. "Working." "Great. I might be late today. We have a consultation about a difficult patient. Don't wait for me for dinner." His voice had the same intonation as always when he reported delays. "Consultation," Esperanza almost smiled. Now she knew what their meetings with Aylin were called. "Of course, dear. See you later." She hung up and looked at her reflection in the black phone screen. The woman looking back at her was no longer the Espiranza who had applied makeup in the bathroom that morning. This was a different woman, harder, more decisive. Esperanza returned to the table and took out a notebook. Years of working in medicine had taught her one important rule. Before treating a disease, you need to make an accurate diagnosis. And for that, complete information is required. She began to write down everything she remembered about Cipriano's behavior over the past year. Dates when he was late, strange calls he took in another room, new habits, changes in their intimacy, unexpected purchases, changes in daily routine. The picture that emerged was depressingly clear. Then Espiranza opened her laptop and began studying family law. She had always been a methodical person, and now this character trait was more useful than ever. If she was going to play a game, then she would play by all the rules. Time was approaching the end of the workday when Espiranza finally put aside the documents and took her phone. She needed an ally, a person she could trust, and she had such a person. Efrain answered after the first ring. "Espiranza? Did something happen?" Genuine concern could be heard in the old friend's voice. "Efrain, I need your help. Can you meet tonight?" "Of course. Where and when?" "At Casablanca at 8. And Efrain..." Esperanza paused, choosing her words. "Now the game begins by my rules." The restaurant Casablanca greeted Esperanza with dim lights and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, mixed with the smell of expensive leather and French perfume. This place had always been associated with business meetings and important conversations for her. There were no random people here, only those who valued confidentiality and quality. Efrain was already waiting for her at a corner table, leafing through documents and occasionally glancing at his watch. The 42-year-old lawyer looked as impeccable as always. Dark suit, neat beard with gray, attentive brown eyes behind expensive glasses. Seeing Esperanza, he stood up to meet her. "Esperanza, you look different," said Efrain, helping her remove her coat. "Did something happen?" "A lot happened." Esperanza sat down across from him, noting to herself that Efrain, as always, could read people. "Thank you for agreeing to meet so quickly. We've known each other for 15 years, and you've never called with that tone in your voice." Efrain gestured to the waiter. "2 espressos, please, and bring us something stronger. Tequila? Good." Esperanza was silent while the waiter withdrew, gathering her thoughts. How to tell about what happened today? Where to start this story that turned her whole life upside down in a few hours? "Cipriano is cheating on me," she finally said, surprised at how simply these words sounded. For over a year, they're going to have a child. Ephraim froze with the cup in his hands. Surprise, then anger, then sympathy reflected on his face. A whole range of emotions in a few seconds. How do you know? He asked quietly. His mistress came to me at work today, young, beautiful, pregnant, and very confident in herself. Espiransa sipped the tequila, feeling the alcohol burn her throat. She demands that I give Cipriano a divorce without scandals. What audacity, Ephraim slammed his fist on the table, to come to the wife and issue ultimatums. You know what's most interesting? Espiransa smirked, and there was nothing cheerful in this smile. I didn't cry, not at all. On the contrary, I had an amazing feeling of clarity, as if a veil fell from my eyes. Ephraim carefully studied her face. Over years of working as a lawyer, he had seen different reactions to betrayal. Hysteria, depression, attempts to deny the obvious. But what he saw now in Espiransa's eyes was unfamiliar to him. What are you planning to do? He asked cautiously. That's why I called you. Espiransa leaned closer. I need information about our joint assets. Detailed. I suspect Cipriano isn't as simple as he seems. You mean hidden income? I mean everything. Accounts, real estate, investments. Something tells me he's been preparing for this development in advance. Ephraim nodded, taking out a notebook from his briefcase. All right, tell me everything you know about your finances. Whose name is the apartment in? Officially both, but Cipriano made the down payment from money he received from selling a car before the wedding. Espiransa wrinkled her forehead, remembering details. He opened the clinic also with his own funds. I only helped with licenses and permits. And the country house? We bought it already married, but the contract is in his name. He said it was easier with taxes. Ephraim recorded, occasionally asking clarifying questions. The more he learned, the darker his face became. Espiransa, I'm afraid your suspicions are justified. It looks like Cipriano really was preparing. In case of divorce, you might get much less than you expect. Espiransa felt a familiar feeling rise in her chest. The same one surgeons experience before a difficult operation. The excitement of a complex task requiring all skills and knowledge. So we need to play smarter, she said calmly. What can you find out unofficially? A lot. I have contacts in the tax office, in banks. But it will take time, Ephraim paused. And there's another question. Are you sure you want to go all the way? Maybe you should try talking to Cipriano. Find out. Ephraim, Espiransa interrupted him. If you had seen this girl today, she didn't come to warn, but to celebrate victory. She already sees herself as the new wife of a successful surgeon, and you know what? She can become one, but not at my expense. There was such determination in her voice that Ephraim understood. It was useless to try to persuade her. The woman sitting across from him was no longer the soft, trusting Espiransa he had known for 15 years. All right, I'll start checking tomorrow. And what will you do at home? Won't Cipriano suspect anything? I thought about that, Espiransa finished her tequila. I'll play the role of the unsuspecting wife, at least until I get the full picture. They stayed in the restaurant for another hour, discussing details and possible scenarios. When Espiransa finally got home, it was already 10:30. Cipriano wasn't there. Another consultation had dragged on. The apartment greeted her with silence and a barely perceptible aroma of expensive perfume. Not hers. Espiransa went to the bedroom, turned on the TV and sat on the bed. She needed to get used to the new reality, to the new role. Cipriano returned around midnight, looking slightly disheveled and satisfied. Seeing his wife reading a medical journal, he smiled. Still not asleep? He asked, kissing her on the top of her head. How was your day? As usual, answered Espiransa, not looking up from the page. And how was your consultation? Difficult, but we managed, Cipriano yawned. The patient is in serious condition. We had to stay late. What a talented actor, thought Espiransa, watching her husband. No signs of embarrassment, guilt, or awkwardness. He looked exactly as a tired doctor should look after a hard day. By the way, Cipriano was taking off his shirt. I might have an urgent surgery this weekend. A private patient pays well. Do you mind if I cancel our plans for the country house? Of course not, Esperanza continued reading. Work is more important. You're the most understanding wife in the world, Cipriano sat on the edge of the bed. You know, sometimes I think I'm incredibly lucky with you. The irony of the situation was so obvious that Esperanza barely held back laughter. Instead, she looked up and smiled with that same warm smile she had been giving him for 15 years. And I'm lucky with you, she said sincerely. It was the truth. If it weren't for Cipriano, she would never have discovered what she was capable of. She wouldn't have discovered this cold determination, this strategic mind, this ability to play games whose rules she dictated herself. The next morning, Espiransa arrived at work with a concrete plan. First, she went to the chief accountant of Cipriano's clinic, an elderly woman named Remedios, who had worked with them since the founding. Good afternoon, Remedios. Esperanza sat in a chair opposite the accountant's desk. I have a delicate request for you. I'm listening, doctor. Esperanza, the elderly woman, put down the calculator. Cipriano asked me to clarify some financial details for the tax declaration. Could you show me the clinic's income reports for the last year? Remedios frowned slightly. Usually Dr. Cipriano handles these matters himself. I know, but he's very busy now preparing for a difficult surgery. Esperanza made an understanding smile. And the tax authorities don't like to wait. Of course, the accountant fussed, pulling out folders. Here are the quarterly reports. Here are the income statements. Esperanza carefully studied the numbers, making notes in her notebook. An interesting picture was emerging. The clinic's income had grown significantly in the last year, but Cipriano's official salary remained the same. Where did the money go? And what is this expense item? Espiransa pointed to a line with a large sum of $150,000. Consulting services, answered Remedios. Dr. Cipriano hired external consultants to optimize work. I see. And can I look at the contracts with these consultants? These documents are kept in Dr. Cipriano's safe. The accountant looked increasingly worried. Maybe it would be better to ask him directly? Yes, of course. Esperanza closed the notebook. Thank you very much for your help. Leaving the accountant's office, Esperanza felt satisfaction. The first clue had been found. Now she needed to act more carefully. During the lunch break, she decided to conduct a small experiment. Taking the phone, Espiransa dialed the number she had memorized from the business card left on her desk in the morning. Hello? A familiar voice answered after the third ring. This is Dr. Cipriano's mother, said Espiransa, changing her voice. Could you tell him that we have family problems and he needs to come urgently? A second's pause, then a frightened voice. My God! What happened? Does he need to go to the hospital? No, not to the hospital. Home. These are family matters. Espiransa hung up. The experiment was successful. 20 minutes later, Cipriano called back. Did Mom call? His voice sounded worried. Me? No. Espiransa made a surprised tone. What happened? I don't know. Someone called Aylin and said on my behalf. Strange, probably a wrong number. Aylin? Espiransa feigned curiosity. Who's that? Oh, it's a new nurse in the operating room. Cipriano hesitated. They mixed up the number, apparently. New nurse, Espiransa smirked. Cipriano clearly wasn't ready for such surprises. I see. Nothing terrible, she said calmly. After this conversation, Espiransa understood. Aylin was nervous, so not as confident in herself as she wanted to show yesterday. This could be used. The rest of the day passed as usual, but Espiransa was already making plans for tomorrow. She was going to pay a visit to Aylin's parents. The address wasn't hard to find. The girl had carelessly mentioned yesterday that she lived with her parents in the Miraflores area. In the evening, when Cipriano was late at work again, Espiransa sat at the computer and began studying information about Aylin on social networks. The young woman turned out to be not too careful. Her profile had many photos, information about work, friends, family. Aylin's parents owned a small children's clothing store. Simple people, apparently very proud of their beautiful daughter. In photos from last year, Espiransa noticed expensive gifts that clearly didn't match the family's income. Jewelry, bags, trips to resorts. So Cipriano wasn't stingy with maintaining his mistress, thought Espiransa. When her husband returned home around 11, Esperanza was already lying in bed with a book. Cipriano looked pleased and relaxed. "How are things?" and he asked, and sitting on the edge of the bed. "Fine. And how was your surgery?" "Difficult but successful," Cipriano yawned. "You know, sometimes I think it's time for me to step back from active practice. Just deal with administrative issues." "Why suddenly?" Esperanza put down the book. "I'm tired. I want to spend more time at home with you." He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Maybe we should think about children. Before it's too late." The cynicism of these words was simply astounding. Talking about children with his wife when his mistress was already pregnant, not everyone was capable of that. Esperanza felt cold anger rising inside. "Do you really want that?" she asked softly. "Yes. I've been thinking about it a lot lately." Cipriano lay down next to her. "We've achieved everything we wanted in our careers. Time to think about a real family." "Real family?" Esperanza closed her eyes, fighting the urge to say everything she thought about him. But that would be a mistake. For now, she had to play the role of a loving wife. "I've been thinking about it too," she said quietly. "Maybe you're right. Then starting tomorrow, we'll start trying." Cipriano hugged her. Esperanza lay in the darkness, feeling the weight of his arm on her waist, and planned tomorrow. In the morning, she was going to pay a visit to Aylin's parents, and in the evening, meet with Efrain and learn the results of his investigations. The game was just beginning, and Esperanza was ready to play to the victorious end. Cipriano had taught her one important lesson. In this life, everyone is for themselves. And she was going to apply this lesson in practice. Falling asleep, she thought about how she had changed in these 2 days. Yesterday morning, she was an ordinary wife who trusted her husband and believed in their family happiness. Today, she was becoming a player in a dangerous game where the stake was her future, and she was going to win. The next morning, Esperanza arrived in the Barranco district earlier than usual. She couldn't sleep after her conversation with Efrain and decided to immediately proceed with implementing the plan. The morning fog was barely dissipating over the sleeping city when she parked her car 2 blocks from the house where Aylin lived with her parents. The area greeted her with the silence of old courtyards and the smell of blooming bougainvillea. Here time seemed to have slowed its pace, creating an atmosphere of measured provincial life in the middle of a megapolis. Yesterday evening, after meeting with Efrain, Esperanza had spent several hours studying information about her rival's family. Aylin Salgado, 24 years old, works as a model in an advertising agency, lives with her parents in a 3-room apartment they bought many years ago. Father, mechanic in an auto service. Mother, salesperson in a children's clothing store. An ordinary family with ordinary dreams, thought Esperanza, watching through the cafe window at the entrance to Aylin's house. Today she was going to deliver the first serious blow to the young rival's self-confidence. At 9:30, a woman of about 50 came out of the house, plump, with a neat hairstyle and in a simple but neat coat. Aylin's mother headed to the bus stop, not even suspecting she was being watched. Espiransa waited until the woman got on the bus and followed her. She needed to act quickly and precisely. Every day of delay gave Cipriano more opportunities to hide assets or come up with a new strategy. The store, Bebitos, was located in an old shopping center, and its window was decorated with bright children's clothes and toys. Esperanza waited another half hour, watching the measured work of the saleswoman, and then went inside. "Good afternoon," the saleswoman said kindly, looking up from her calculations. "How can I help you?" "Hello," Esperanza smiled. "Are you Soledad, Aylin's mother?" The woman tensed but nodded. "Yes, and you are?" "My name is Espiransa. I work with your daughter," Esperanza lied, studying the woman's reaction. "Aylin asked me to tell you that she won't be able to come to the shoot today. She's not feeling well." "Did something happen?" Soledad became alarmed. "She seemed fine this morning." "Probably just fatigue," Esperanza paused. "Although, I'm very worried about Aylin. She's going through such a difficult period in her personal life right now." "In what sense?" The mother's voice became wary. Esperanza looked around, making sure there was no one in the store, and lowered her voice. "Aylin recently told me about her friend, this married man. Soledad, forgive me for interfering, but I think he's just using her." Aylin's mother's face paled. What married man? She asked in a trembling voice. You didn't know? Esperanza feigned surprise. Aylin has been dating a married doctor for over a year. He promises to divorce her, but you understand how often men say such things. Soledad sank into a chair, clutching her heart. My God. And I thought she just had a lot of work. These gifts, trips. Aylin is a very good girl, but she's still young, naive, Esperanza continued in a soft tone. I think this man is just leading her on. For people like him, family always comes first, no matter what they promise their mistresses. Mistresses? Soledad sobbed. My little Aylin, how could this be? Don't be so upset. The main thing is to open her eyes in time. Esperanza sat down next to the woman. Talk to her. Explain that she deserves more than being the secret girlfriend of someone else's husband. I don't know what to say, Soledad wiped away tears with a handkerchief. Tell the truth, that you love her and want to see her happy, not with someone else's husband, but with a free person who can give her a real family. Esperanza left the store with a firm conviction that the seeds of doubt had been sown on fertile ground. Now it remained to wait for how soon they would sprout. She had the feeling of a chess game, where every move was carefully thought out, and the opponent didn't yet realize the game had already begun. The next stop was at Ephraim's office. The lawyer met her with a folder of documents and a grim expression. The first results are already in, he said without preamble. Your suspicions are justified. Cipriano has an offshore account in the Caymans, where he's been transferring significant sums for a year and a half. How much money is there? Asked Espiransa, sitting in a chair. According to preliminary calculations, about $3 million. Officially, these are investments in developing a medical business, but in fact, the money is just lying there as dead weight. Espiransa felt the familiar feeling of cold anger rising in her chest. $3 million. That's half of their jointly acquired property that Cipriano was trying to hide. What about real estate? He re-registered the country house to a front person, a certain Escobar, who turned out to be a distant relative. Formally, it's a sale, but the money stayed in the family. Ephraim leafed through the documents. Plus, he's renting an apartment in the center for meetings with his mistress. A 2-year contract, paid in advance. How prudent, Esperanza smirked. And the clinic? The clinic is more complicated. Formally, you're not a co-owner, although you participated in its creation. But there are nuances with licenses. Some documents were processed with your participation as a doctor. Espiransa was silent, digesting the information. The picture was becoming clearer. Cipriano was systematically preparing for divorce, withdrawing assets from possible division. What shall we do? Play by his rules. Espiransa stood up and went to the window. But with small changes. What kind? He thinks I don't know anything and don't suspect. That's his main mistake, steel notes sounded in Esperanza's voice. While he's calming down his hysterical mistress, I'll gather all the evidence of his machinations. You talk as if you already know Aylin is hysterical. She will be soon. After a conversation with Mom, she'll have doubts. And doubt is the beginning of the end for any mistress. That same evening, when Cipriano was again late at a consultation, Espiransa decided to strike another blow. She knew Aylin's phone number and decided to use it. She changed her voice using a special application that Ephraim had advised her to install on her phone. Now she sounded like an elderly woman. Hello, girl, she said in a trembling voice. This is Doctor, Cipriano's neighbor from the country house. I'm listening, Aylin answered warily. You see, there's this thing. Dr. Cipriano asked me to tell you that his wife will come to you tomorrow. She wants to show the house to a friend who's planning to buy a similar one. What? Aylin's voice trembled. His wife? Well, yes, Doctor. Espiransa. Very nice woman, by the way. She and Dr. Cipriano are such a beautiful couple. So many years together. Wait, Aylin interrupted. What wife? Cipriano said they were getting divorced. Divorcing? The old woman feigned surprise. What are you saying, dear? They were just recently discussing vacation plans. They're going to Argentina, Doctor. Cipriano cares so touchingly for his spouse. Espiransa hung up, imagining what state the young mistress was in now. Doubt is the first step to panic? and panic leads to mistakes. Not even half an hour had passed when Cipriano's phone rang. Espiransa saw him look nervously at the screen before answering. "Hello?" His voice sounded wary. Espiransa couldn't hear what Aylin was saying to him, but from her husband's reaction she could guess. His face changed from surprise to irritation, then to anxiety. "What neighbor?" Cipriano stood up and went to another room. "Aylin, calm down. I'll come now." "No, don't cry. This is some misunderstanding." He returned a few minutes later, looking worried and angry. "I need to go urgently to a patient," he said, putting on his jacket. "Post-operative complication." At this time, Espiransa looked at the clock. It was almost 11. "Sometimes it happens." Cipriano was quickly getting ready. "Don't wait for me. I might only return in the morning." Of course, the whole night will be spent calming down the hysterical mistress, thought Espiransa, seeing her husband to the door. "Be careful," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "And don't overwork yourself." "Thank you, dear. You're the most understanding." Cipriano hugged her, and there wasn't a gram of sincerity in this embrace. Left alone, she opened her laptop and began studying information about a private detective that a friend had recommended. If she was going to play seriously, she needed serious tools. The next day, Thursday, Espiransa decided to increase the pressure. She knew that Aylin worked as a model in an advertising agency and decided to pay a visit to her employer. The agency, Image Plus, was located in a modern business center, and its office looked exactly as a successful advertising company's office should look. Glass partitions, bright posters, trendy furniture. "I'd like to talk to the manager about cooperation," Espiransa told the administrator. "Dr. Osvaldo is free now." The girl led her to the director's office. Osvaldo turned out to be a man of about 45, with attentive eyes and a firm handshake. "I'm listening," he said, inviting her to sit. "How can we help?" "I have a private clinic. We're planning an advertising campaign." Espiransa took out a business card. "I heard you have a very talented girl working here, Aylin Salgado. I'd like to work specifically with her." "Aylin is indeed one of our best models," the director nodded, "but she's having some problems right now. Perhaps you should consider other candidates." "What problems?" "Well, you know how it is with young girls. Personal matters, nerves. Yesterday, she didn't even come to the shoot, calling in sick. And the day before yesterday, she was kind of depressed all day." "So the pressure is already yielding results," thought Espiransa. "I understand," she said sympathetically. "And what are the problems? If it's not a secret, maybe I can somehow help." Osvaldo was silent, apparently deciding whether to share details. "Aylin got involved with a married man," he finally said. "It seems he promised her mountains of gold, and now something went wrong. The girl is all worn out, constantly crying, can't concentrate on work." "What a pity," Espiransa shook her head. "It happens so often with young girls. They believe the promises of married men, and those—" "Exactly. And Aylin is so talented, beautiful. She could find a normal guy, start a family." The director sighed. "But no, you see, she fell in love." "Maybe someone should talk to her," suggested Espiransa. "Sometimes an outside perspective helps open your eyes to the situation." "We tried, it only got worse. She says he'll divorce soon, that they'll have a child." Osvaldo waved his hand. "Youth." Espiransa left the agency with a feeling of deep satisfaction. The plan was working better than she expected. Aylin no longer looked as confident and happy as the day before yesterday in her office. That same evening, she met with a private detective, a middle-aged man with attentive eyes and neat manners. "I need complete information about my husband's movements," she said directly. "Where he goes, who he meets with, what he does." "I understand," the detective nodded. "You suspect infidelity?" "I don't suspect. I know for sure. I need evidence for court." "All right. Photos, videos, documents about expenses, the full package. This will take several weeks." "Excellent. And one more request." Espiransa leaned closer. "I need my husband to find out about this surveillance. Not right away, but to find out." The detective raised his eyebrows. Usually clients ask for the opposite. "I'm not a usual client," Espiransa smiled. "I need him to start getting nervous." "Understood. When do we start?" "Tomorrow. And remember, I pay for results, not time. On Friday morning, when Cipriano left for work looking tired and irritated, Esperanza decided to check how things were going with Aylin. She knew the address of the rental apartment where the lovers met and decided to arrange a little surveillance. Parking at the entrance, she began to wait. Around noon, Cipriano appeared, and half an hour later, Aylin. The girl looked pale and agitated, not at all like 3 days ago. Esperanza waited for them to go upstairs and called the intercom of the neighboring apartment. "Sorry, this is the management company calling," she said into the receiver. "We have complaints about noise from the apartment next to you. Could you confirm?" "Oh, yes," a male voice answered. "It really is noisy there, especially recently. They argue constantly." "Argue?" "Well, yes, a young couple. The girl often cries, shouts something about a wife and divorce, and the man tries to calm her down. Yesterday, I even wanted to call security. I thought they were fighting." "I see. Thank you for the information." Esperanza drove away from the house with a feeling of complete satisfaction. Aylin was no longer that self-confident girl who had come to her office 3 days ago with an ultimatum. Now she doubted, was nervous, argued with Cipriano, and this meant that the first stage of the plan was completed successfully. Now it was necessary to move on to more serious measures. The detective had already started work. Efrain was gathering evidence of financial fraud, and the seeds of doubt sown in Aylin's head were already sprouting. At home, Cipriano was waiting for her, gloomy and irritated. "How was work?" asked Esperanza, as if nothing had happened. "Difficult?" he grunted. "Very difficult." No wonder, thought Esperanza, watching her husband. Calming down a hysterical mistress is no joke. "Maybe you should take a day off," she suggested caringly. "You look exhausted." "I can't. Too much to do." Cipriano waved her off. "Then at least let's spend the evening together. We haven't really talked in a long time." Cipriano looked at her with some strange expression, as if seeing her for the first time. "Yes, you're right. It's been a while." They spent the evening watching a movie, and Esperanza played the role of a loving wife so skillfully that she almost believed it herself. Almost, because she knew tomorrow a new stage of the game would begin, and she was going to win this game. Falling asleep next to her husband, who was already snoring, lost in heavy sleep, Esperanza thought about how quickly life changes. 3 days ago, she was a deceived wife, and today, an experienced strategist methodically destroying the enemy's plans. And the most amazing thing? She liked it. For the first time in many years, she felt truly alive. On Saturday morning, the detective called. Espiransa took the call in her office. She had arrived at work early to talk in peace. The clinic worked on a limited schedule on weekends, and here you didn't have to worry about extra ears. "I have interesting information for you." Sylvester's voice sounded professionally restrained. "Your spouse is indeed leading a double life. Yesterday, I recorded a meeting in an apartment in the center lasting 4 hours. Are there photos? Of course, the first shots I managed to take these days. But that's not all. Dr. Cipriano is making financial transactions that might interest you. Large transfers to third-party accounts." Espiransa felt her pulse quicken. Finally, concrete evidence appeared. "When can we meet?" "Tonight. I'll bring all the materials." After talking with the detective, Espiransa opened her laptop and went to a real estate agency website. An idea had come to her that could be the decisive move in this game. If Cipriano was renting an apartment for meetings with Aylin, why not rent the neighboring one? The real estate agent turned out to be a pleasant young man. He readily showed her several options in the same building in the San Isidro area. "Apartment 107 is very good," he said, opening the door. "Quiet neighbors, good renovation, furniture included in the rent." Espiransa inspected the premises, a standard one-room apartment with good soundproofing. But the main thing, it was right across from apartment 105, where Cipriano and Aylin met. "This suits me," she said. "Can I sign a 6-month lease?" "Of course, just a deposit and first month in advance." "No problem." While processing the documents, Espiransa felt the excitement of a hunter tracking prey. Now she would have the opportunity to control every movement of her unfaithful husband. In the evening in the rented apartment, she met with the detective. Sylvester laid out photos and documents on the table. "Here are the first shots I managed to take," he showed. Dr. Cipriano and the girl entering the building, leaving several hours later. And here are bank statements. Regular transfers to the account of one Eileen Salgado. Espiransa studied the photos, in which her husband looked relaxed and happy, the way she hadn't seen him at home for many months. How much does he transfer to her? On average, $5,000 a month, plus payment for this apartment, gifts, trips. I see, and what about offshore accounts? That's more complicated, but my contact at the tax office confirmed. There's movement of large sums. If necessary, an audit can be initiated. Espiranza nodded, putting the documents in a folder. The plan was beginning to take clear shape. Silvestre, can you arrange for Cipriano to notice the surveillance? Accidentally, of course. The detective smirked. I can. I have an assistant, not very experienced. Let him show himself a bit. Excellent. In a week or two. For now, let him think everything is under control. The next day, Sunday, Espiranza decided to strike another blow to Aylin's peace of mind. She knew the girl went to a gym near the agency and decided to arrange an accidental meeting. The fitness club, Vital, greeted her with the aroma of chlorine and the sounds of modern music. Espiranza bought a one-time pass and went to the women's locker room, where, as she had calculated, Aylin was changing. The girl looked even worse than this week, pale with dark circles under her eyes, clearly having lost weight. Seeing Espiranza, she froze with a towel in her hands. You! What are you doing here? Her voice trembled with excitement. Oh, it's you! Espiranza feigned surprise. Aylin, right? We met last week in my office. Yes, we met. Aylin clearly didn't know how to behave. You know, I thought about our conversation. Espiranza began changing into sports clothes and decided you were right. Maybe it really is time to change something in the relationship. Aylin turned sharply. What do you mean? I talked to Cipriano, hinted that I know about your relationship. Espiranza was tying her sneakers. He was so confused. Apparently didn't expect me to be so understanding. He told you about me. Not right away, of course. At first he tried to deny it, but then he admitted. Espiranza stood up and looked at Aylin. You know what's most interesting? He said he's not ready for serious changes yet, that he needs time to think. Aylin's face paled even more. Time to think? But we're going to have a baby. Yes, he mentioned that. Said it complicates the situation? Espiranza paused. Aylin, forgive my frankness, but maybe you shouldn't rush things. Men don't like being forced to make decisions under pressure. But he promised. Promising and doing are different things, especially when it comes to radical life changes. Aylin sank onto the bench, and Espiranza saw that the girl was on the verge of tears. I love him so much, she whispered in a trembling voice. I'm ready to wait as long as necessary. Of course you can wait, but just think. You're 24 years old, you're young, beautiful. Is it worth spending your best years waiting? Espiranza took her sports bag and headed for the exit. Good luck to you, Aylin. I hope you make the right decision. Leaving the locker room, Espiranza felt satisfaction. A little more, and Aylin herself would begin to doubt the correctness of her choice. On Monday morning, Efrain called with news. Espiranza, I have information about that Escobar to whom the country house was re-registered. The lawyer's voice sounded excited. It's Cipriano's second cousin, an alcoholic with big debts. The deal is clearly fictitious. Can this be proven? It can if we act correctly. But there's even more interesting information. Cipriano is planning to sell the clinic. Espiranza felt her blood run cold. How do you know this? My acquaintance at the notary office saw a draft contract. The buyer is some offshore company. The amount is serious, $20 million. He wants to sell the clinic and disappear. Looks like it. All assets are being withdrawn, leaving only an empty shell of family life. Espiranza was silent, processing what she had heard. So Cipriano was planning not just a divorce, but a complete disappearance from her life along with all the money. Efrain, we need to act faster. How much time do we have? Judging by the documents, the deal is planned for the end of the month. That is 3 weeks. Then we launch Plan B. Remember we discussed the possibility of initiating a tax audit? I remember. This is a serious step, Espiranza. There will be no turning back. I understand. But if we don't stop him now, it will be too late. That same day, Espiransa sent an anonymous letter to the tax inspection, attaching copies of documents about suspicious financial transactions. Now it remained to wait. Cipriano returned home late in the evening, looking even gloomier than usual. "How are things?" asked Espiransa, not looking up from her book. "Fine," he grunted, going to the bathroom. "Cipriano," Espiransa called out to him, "is everything all right? You've been kind of nervous lately." He stopped in the doorway and she saw wariness in his eyes. "Just a lot of work, difficult patients, staff problems. Maybe you should take a vacation. Go somewhere, rest." "I can't right now. Too important a period." No wonder, thought Espiransa. Selling a clinic is indeed an important period. "All right, but if something happens, you'll tell me? We're family. We should support each other." Cipriano looked at her with a long gaze. "Of course, dear. I'll definitely tell you." On Tuesday, Espiransa received a call from Silvestre. "We have changes in the subject's behavior," the detective said cautiously. "Your husband has become more careful. He changes routes, checks if he's being followed. He may have suspected something." "That's good," Espiransa answered calmly. "It means he's nervous. Continue surveillance, but be more careful." "There's one more piece of news. The girl, Aylin, came to see him at the clinic yesterday. There were shouts heard, then she ran out in tears." "Interesting. So our efforts haven't been in vain." On Wednesday evening, Espiransa decided to check how much her husband's behavior had changed. She got in the car and drove to the house in San Isidro, where the lovers met. Parking at a safe distance, she began to wait. Around 8 in the evening, Cipriano appeared. He looked around several times before entering the building. Aylin came half an hour later, and even from a distance it was clear that the girl was upset. Espiransa went up to her rented apartment and listened at the door. The soundproofing turned out to be not as good as the developer had calculated. Voices could be heard quite clearly. "I can't do this anymore," Aylin cried through tears. "You promised everything would be resolved quickly, and a month has passed." "Aylin, calm down. It's not as simple as it seems." Cipriano's voice sounded irritated. "What's complicated?" "You said your marriage was a formality." "I said, but now is not the best time for changes. I have problems with business. The tax authorities are sniffing around." "What difference do your problems make to me?" the girl shouted. "We're going to have a baby." "Quieter, the neighbors will hear." "I don't care about the neighbors. Cipriano, I want to know when you'll finally get divorced." A long pause. "Aylin, maybe we should wait with the baby. Now is not the most suitable time." "What do you mean?" "Well, there are ways to postpone it for later." Espiransa heard the sound of a slap. Shocked silence hung in the air. "Are you suggesting I have an abortion?" Aylin's voice trembled with rage. "I'm suggesting being reasonable. Think for yourself. What future can I offer you now?" "You promised me this future. You said you loved me." "I do love you, but—" "No buts. Either you divorce, or I'll go to your wife myself and tell her everything." "You already went to her. What's the point?" "Then I'll tell everyone, your colleagues, patients, the whole city." "Aylin, don't do anything stupid." Espiransa heard the door slam and quick footsteps on the stairs. A few minutes later, Cipriano also left the apartment. She remained standing at the door, analyzing what she had heard. The lovers' relationship was cracking at the seams. Cipriano clearly wasn't going to marry Aylin, and the girl was beginning to understand this. A little more, thought Espiransa, and they'll destroy everything themselves. On Thursday, what she had been waiting for happened. Cipriano received a notice of a tax audit. He came home pale and confused. "What happened?" asked Espiransa, feigning concern. "The tax office has scheduled an audit of the clinic. They say they received a signal about questionable operations." "But that's absurd. All your documents are in order." "I thought so too." Cipriano sat at the table and grabbed his head. "But now I don't know. They can find violations even where there aren't any. Maybe you should consult a lawyer." "I already have. He says it's serious. They might freeze accounts, seize documents." Espiransa approached him and put her hand on his shoulder. "Cipriano, whatever happens, we'll manage. Together." He looked up at her, and she saw gratitude mixed with fear in them. "Thank you, Espiransa. You're the best." If only you knew, she thought, continuing to stroke his shoulder. On Friday evening, Aylin called Cipriano. Esperanza saw him nervously look at the screen before answering. Yes, Aylin. No, I can't right now. I have problems. Yes, serious ones. Not now, please. The conversation was short, but Esperanza understood. The relationship was finally collapsing. Aylin demanded attention and decisions, and Cipriano was too frightened by the tax audit to think about his mistress. Who called? Asked Esperanza innocently. A nurse from the operating room asked about the schedule for next week. Cipriano didn't even look at her while telling this lie. I see. And why are you so nervous about the tax audit? After all, everything is honest with us. You know, Espiransa, Cipriano suddenly looked at her attentively. Sometimes I think someone specifically wants to harm me, as if all these problems aren't a coincidence. Esperanza felt her pulse quicken. Was he beginning to suspect something? What do you mean? I don't know. Just a strange feeling that I'm being watched, that someone is gathering information. Cipriano, you're just tired and nervous. When a person is under stress, they see conspiracies everywhere. Maybe you're right, he rubbed his forehead with a tired gesture. Maybe I'm really going crazy. Falling asleep that night, Esperanza felt satisfaction. The trap was slowly but surely closing. Cipriano was caught in a trap of his own greed and lies. The tax audit, the breakup with his mistress, suspicions about surveillance. All this was working for her, and she patiently waited for the moment when she could deliver the decisive blow. Very little was left, and the game would be completed by her rules. On Saturday morning came an unexpected call from Cipriano. Esperanza hadn't slept all Friday night, expecting developments, and the call wasn't a surprise. Something had radically changed in his behavior over the weekend. Perhaps the tax audit, the breakup with Aylin, and suspicions about surveillance had finally broken him. Espiransa, we need to talk. Her husband's voice sounded tired and determined at the same time. Seriously talk. About what? Not over the phone. Let's meet at home tonight. It's important. Esperanza felt her pulse quicken. Had Cipriano decided to be frank? Or on the contrary, had he suspected something? All right, I'll be home by 7. All day she thought about the upcoming conversation. The tax audit was in full swing, relations with Aylin had finally deteriorated, and the detective reported that Cipriano had become paranoidly cautious. Perhaps he had finally decided to surrender. The house greeted her with an unusual atmosphere. Cipriano had set the table, opened expensive wine, lit candles. He looked exhausted but somehow enlightened, as if he had made a difficult decision. Over the past weeks, he had aged considerably. New wrinkles appeared, gray hair, heavy bags under his eyes. Sit down, he said softly. We really need to talk. Esperanza sat across from him, studying her husband's face. Fear of consequences and awareness of the hopelessness of the situation could be read in every feature. Espiransa, I want to ask for your forgiveness. Cipriano began, not raising his eyes with remorse. For everything, for the lies, for the betrayal, for letting you down as a husband. That's it, thought Espiranza, but kept her face impassive. What are you talking about? Don't pretend. I know that you know. Cipriano finally looked at her. About Aylin, about our meetings, about everything. Where does such confidence come from? She told me about your meetings, about how you talked to her. Espiranza, forgive me. I understand that I acted like a complete scoundrel. Espiranza was silent, enjoying the moment. Cipriano continued, You know what's most terrible? I almost lost the most precious thing I have. You, our family. For what? For a stupid fling with a girl who only sees me as a wallet. What about the child? Espiranza asked quietly. Cipriano shuddered. What child? Did she tell you about a child? Espiranza, it's a lie. There's no pregnancy. She just wanted to force me to divorce. Espiranza felt everything turning over inside. So Aylin lied about the pregnancy? Or was Cipriano lying now? How do you know? Because I made her take a test in the presence of a doctor. The result is negative. All this time she was deceiving me. Cipriano's voice trembled with anger. Do you understand? I almost destroyed our family for a lying girl. And what now? Now I'm asking you for a second chance, he said pleadingly. Let's forget this mistake and start all over again. Let's go on vacation. Think about children, about our future. Espiransa looked at her husband and felt a strange emptiness. A month ago, these words would have made her happy. Now they seemed belated and insincere. And what about your plans to sell the clinic? She asked calmly. Cipriano turned pale. How do you? Who told you? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you plan to disappear with the money, leaving me with nothing. No, that is... Yes, I thought about selling, but not to deceive you. I just wanted to start a new life somewhere, far from all these problems. With Aylin? Yes, number I don't know. Espiransa, I was in such a panic that I didn't realize what I was doing. Espiransa stood up and went to the window. Behind the glass, the lights of the evening city flickered, and in their light, she suddenly clearly saw her future. It didn't include Cipriano. You know what I understood during these weeks? She said without turning around. That our marriage has been dead for a long time. We just didn't want to admit it. That's not true. We can fix everything. No, Cipriano. You can't fix what was wrong from the beginning. You cheated on me not because you met the love of your life. You cheated because you were bored. And boredom is not a disease that can be cured. Espiransa, please. I'm filing for divorce, she said simply. On Monday, Espiransa met with Efrain in his office. The lawyer looked pleased. The tax audit yielded results, he reported. They found violations amounting to about $4 million. Cipriano faces a serious fine and possibly criminal charges. What does this mean for the divorce? That the division of property will go in your favor. The court will take into account attempts to hide assets and financial fraud. And the offshore accounts? They'll find those too. We have all the documents. Cipriano will get what he deserved. Espiransa nodded. Justice would prevail, but somehow this didn't bring the expected satisfaction. Efrain, what about that apartment I rented? You can terminate the contract. It's no longer needed. I don't want to. Let it stay. I like the idea of having a secluded place in the city center. Efrain looked at her attentively. Espiransa, how are you? Holding up? You know, it's strange, but I feel better than I have in years, as if I've thrown off a huge burden from my shoulders. That's natural. You're freeing yourself from a toxic relationship. Perhaps, or maybe I just discovered abilities in myself that I didn't suspect. On Tuesday, Espiransa received a call from Aylin. The girl was sobbing into the phone through tears. Dr. Espiransa, can I meet with you? I need to talk to someone who will understand. They met in the same cafe where Espiransa once planned her revenge. Aylin looked thin, pale, with eyes red from crying. He left me, the girl said without preamble. Cipriano said I was a liar and adventurer, and that he doesn't want to see me anymore. What about love? Asked Espiransa. What love? Aylin laughed bitterly. He was only interested in one thing, and when problems started, he was the first to run away. And what now? I don't know. Lost my job, no money, parents aren't talking. Aylin sobbed. Doctor, Espiransa, why didn't you tell me the truth then? That he's just playing with me? Espiransa was silent for a long time, looking at the unhappy girl. Because you wouldn't have believed me. You needed to see for yourself. Yes, probably. And will you forgive him? We're getting divorced. Aylin looked up in surprise. But he came back to you. He realized he was wrong. Aylin, understand one thing. A man who is capable of such betrayal will do it again at the first opportunity. Forgiveness is not weakness, but it's not stupidity either. And returning to a person who doesn't value you is precisely stupidity. So we both ended up with nothing? No, Espiransa smiled. We both got a lesson. Expensive, but valuable. On Wednesday morning, Cipriano left the house with 2 suitcases. They hardly talked these days. Everything was decided through lawyers. Espiransa, he said at the door, I still hope you'll change your mind. Don't hope. This is a final decision. And what will you do next? Live. Live fully. not exist in an illusion of family happiness. After he left, Espiransa sat in a chair by the window with a cup of coffee. The house seemed different, bigger, brighter, filled with possibilities. For the first time in many years, she felt truly free. The phone rang. Efrain. Espiransa, would you like to have dinner tonight? Celebrate a new life? You know I would, but not to celebrate, just to have dinner with a friend. Agreed. Shall we meet at 7? At 7. Esperanza hung up and looked at her reflection in the dark screen. The woman looking back at her had changed. Strength, confidence, knowledge of her own worth had appeared in her eyes. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in pink and golden tones. One day and one life were ending, but another day and another life were beginning, one she would choose and create herself. Esperanza finished her coffee and went to get ready for dinner with relief. She had a feeling that the most interesting was just beginning. What do you think? Did Esperanza act too hastily? Maybe she should have accepted her husband's repentance and just continued living peacefully? Or did she do the right thing? We await your opinion in the comments.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.